Fall comes early to Rochester, Minnesota. By mid-September, the maple leaves begin to turn red, and the mornings and evenings grow quite chilly. In this city known for its medical center, the Mayo Clinic, Becky Martinson had worked as a nurse at the local general hospital for 15 years. April, breakfast is ready. While making pancakes in the kitchen, Becky called up to her daughter's room on the second floor. Thomas was already sitting at the dining table, reading the newspaper with a cup of coffee in hand. Gray had begun to appear around her husband's temples, but it suited his calm demeanor perfectly. "Good morning, Papa." April came running down the stairs and suddenly hugged her father from behind. At 15, their daughter had her mother's light brown hair and her father's blue eyes. Though she had just started her freshman year of high school, she was already taller than her mother. "You have a test today, don't you?" Becky asked as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of April. "Yes, biology. I think I'll get a perfect score," April replied while pouring plenty of maple syrup on her pancakes. Becky and Thomas exchanged smiles at their daughter's confidence. "In that case, I'll let you have your sleepover this weekend," her mother said. April's face lit up at her mother's words. She had made plans to stay at her friend Caitlin Bradley's house. "Thanks, Mom. I'll let Caitlin know right away." After quickly finishing her breakfast, April took out her cell phone and began typing a message. The Martinson family and the Bradley family had gotten to know each other when April and Caitlin ended up in the same class at high school. At first, they only saw each other at PTA meetings, but the two girls quickly became friends, and gradually the relationship developed into one between families. Richard Bradley was a well-respected pediatrician in the community. With his gentle manner and intelligent appearance, he had earned the trust of his young patients' parents. His wife, Margaret, was a full-time homemaker who actively participated in local volunteer activities. On the surface, they seemed like the perfect family. However, Becky, with her experience as a nurse, occasionally noticed something odd in Margaret's subtle gestures and expressions. In particular, she was concerned about how tense Margaret became when Richard was around, and how she always wore long-sleeved clothing regardless of the season. "Becky, these cookies are lovely. Would you mind sharing the recipe?" Margaret had approached Becky after last week's PTA meeting. Even then, she was wearing a long-sleeved blouse, and Becky noticed her unconscious habit of pulling at her cuffs. "Yes, of course. It's a family secret recipe. I'll email it to you soon." Even as she continued the conversation, Becky's professional instincts were sensing something. But she couldn't probe any further. "Caitlin's house is really big. Her dad's a doctor, you know. They even have a soundproof basement. We're going to have a movie marathon there." Friday evening, April was excitedly talking about her weekend plans. As Becky packed her daughter's change of clothes and pajamas into a sports bag, she felt somewhat uneasy. "Is something bothering you?" Thomas placed his hand on Becky's shoulder and asked. He was good at reading concern in his wife's expressions. "No. I'm just a little worried since it's her first time staying at someone else's house." Becky shrugged as she answered. She herself didn't understand the source of this vague anxiety. "You're worrying too much. April is a responsible girl, and the Bradleys have a good reputation. Besides, we've told her to call immediately if anything happens, right?" Becky felt somewhat reassured by Thomas's words. He was always calm and rational. As a lawyer by profession, he was skilled at judging situations objectively without being swayed by emotions. "Yes, you're right." Becky put on a smile as she responded. "I'm leaving now." April gave her mother a hug and ran toward Richard Bradley's car, which was waiting for her. Richard waved from the window and greeted them politely. "I'll take good care of your daughter. I'll bring her back tomorrow afternoon." His smile was perfect. Too perfect, in fact, that Becky felt a chill. Yes, please take care of her. Though she responded with a smile, anxiety again crossed Becky's heart. She stood at the doorway until the car disappeared around the corner. When she returned to the house, Thomas was sitting on the sofa watching television. Come on, let's enjoy some time for just the two of us. Thomas took Becky's hand and invited her to sit on the sofa. Indeed, it was rare for them to spend quiet time together in their busy lives. Becky took a deep breath and smiled, trying to shake off her anxiety. April and Caitlin's friendship had deepened rapidly in just 2 months since high school began. Though they appeared to have opposite personalities, that seemed to be what drew them to each other. April was bright and active, a member of the drama club who always brought smiles to those around her. Caitlin, on the other hand, was quiet and sensitive, a member of the library committee who often spent her afternoons in the library. Caitlin is really smart. But she lacks confidence and never raises her hand in class. She always gets the right answer when the teacher calls on her, April had told her mother. As Becky listened to her daughter, she recalled Caitlin's behavior. The girl had once come to the hospital for a flu test. Becky remembered how she had shrunk back and hidden behind her mother when she saw a male doctor in a white coat. At the time, Becky thought it was just fear of doctors, but now she wondered if it might have been a different kind of signal. Hey Mom, what do you think of Caitlin's mother? April asked abruptly one day. Margaret? Well, she seems like a kind person, but I get the impression she's a bit tense, Becky answered honestly. I think so too. When Caitlin's dad is home, she gets really nervous. It's like she's afraid of making a mistake. Becky was surprised by her daughter's keen observation. April had not only kindness but also the ability to perceive the subtleties of people's hearts. As the season deepened, April and Caitlin's friendship deepened as well. They began working on school projects together and frequently spent time together after school. However, they usually spent time at the Martinson house, and rarely went to the Bradley house. Why don't you ever go to Caitlin's house? When Becky asked, April gave a somewhat vague answer. Her dad is strict, I guess. He doesn't really welcome friends over. Those words created a nagging feeling in Becky's heart. Richard Bradley was a respected pediatrician in the community. It was hard to imagine him being strict with children from his public persona. By mid-October, as Becky had more opportunities to meet Margaret at PTA gatherings, she began observing her more carefully. Though the season was already getting cold, she still found it strange that Margaret always wore long-sleeved clothing that covered her neck completely. She was also concerned about how Margaret would leave the room to speak quietly whenever she received a call from Richard. Margaret, would you like to come over for tea next week? Becky ventured to invite her. Margaret looked surprised for a moment. Oh, yes, but I should check Richard's schedule first. I'm not inviting him. Just some girl talk. Richard must be busy, right? Becky felt Margaret's tension ease a bit. Yes. I'd like that. I'll let you know. In the end, that tea gathering never happened. Margaret later contacted Becky saying she had fallen ill. In early November, April brought up the subject during dinner. Mom, Dad, I'd like to stay over at Caitlin's house this weekend. Thomas answered without particular concern, of course, that's fine, but Becky hesitated for a moment. What's wrong, Mom? April asked curiously. Nothing. I'm just a little worried since it's your first time staying at someone else's house. I'll be fine, I'm not a child anymore. Besides, Caitlin's dad is a doctor, right? I'd be in good hands if anything happened. Those words actually amplified Becky's anxiety. Because he was a doctor, if something happened. But was that just professional bias? Becky couldn't tell if her concerns were baseless anxiety or an intuitive warning. All right. But call immediately if anything happens. I know. April answered with a casual wave of her hand. That night, Becky confided her worries to Thomas. He put his arm around his wife's shoulders and said gently, "Becky, sometimes you're too protective. April is 15 now. We need to let her become independent gradually. Besides, the Bradley family has a good reputation in town." I know. It's just that I feel like Margaret is hiding something. She seems like a different person when Richard is around, so tense. That might just be the nature of their relationship. Not all couples have the easygoing relationship that we do, Thomas explained logically. Becky sighed deeply. I suppose, maybe I'm overthinking things. As the weekend approached, April's excitement grew. She talked enthusiastically about how Caitlin's house had the latest movie streaming services, and they were planning a horror movie marathon. Friday morning, Becky checked that everything necessary was packed in April's overnight bag. Pajamas, change of clothes, toothbrush, and even some regular medication just in case. Mom, I'm not a child anymore. I checked everything myself, April protested, slightly embarrassed. It's a mother's instinct, Becky answered with a smile. In the evening, Richard Bradley arrived by car as planned. April loaded her luggage into the car, her face glowing with excitement and anticipation. Well then, I'll be borrowing your daughter, Richard greeted Becky with a perfect smile. I'll bring her back tomorrow afternoon. Please take care of her, Becky responded politely. April waved from the window and called out, "Don't worry." Becky continued waving until the car disappeared around the corner. When she returned to the house, Thomas had already started preparing a special dinner. Let's enjoy our first night alone in a while. As Becky watched her husband's back as he boiled pasta, she muttered to herself, "It'll be fine, nothing will happen." After dinner, Becky and Thomas were watching a movie in the living room, sipping wine. They were enjoying the comfort of conversation that remained unchanged even after 15 years of marriage. The clock showed 9 o'clock. Any word from April? Thomas asked as he tilted his glass. Yes, she sent a brief message right after she arrived. Arrived, movie night, good night is what she wrote. Becky showed him the screen of her phone. See? There was nothing to worry about, Thomas said reassuringly. Just at that moment, Becky's phone rang loudly. Looking at the screen, she saw it was a call from Margaret Bradley. 9:15 p.m. It was unusual to get a call from a friend at this hour. A moment of anxiety crossed Becky's heart. Hello, Margaret. What she heard from the other end was a distraught voice. Becky, come get April right away. Margaret's voice was shaking and broken. In the background, Becky could hear the sound of something breaking, and what seemed like a small scream. Margaret? What happened? Is April okay? Tension crept into Becky's voice, and Thomas stopped the movie and turned toward his wife. Right now. Please, don't tell anyone, just come. With that, the call ended. Becky stood up in agitation and briefly explained the situation to Thomas. I got a call from Margaret asking me to pick up April right away. Something is wrong. Her voice was trembling. Thomas immediately stood up as well. I'll go with you. You come later. I'll go first. It might be a situation better handled by women. Becky quickly grabbed her car keys and rushed out, not even taking time to put on a coat. It had started to rain coldly outside. As she started the car, worst-case scenarios flashed through her mind, appearing and disappearing. The Bradley house was located in an upscale neighborhood. The large white colonial-style house would normally symbolize the perfect family, judging by its exterior. But tonight, the light leaking from its windows created an ominous atmosphere. As Becky parked her car, the front door opened, and Margaret came out. She was a shadow of her usual well-put-together self. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying, and a red mark was visible on her cheek. The cuff of her long-sleeved blouse was torn, revealing a blue-purple bruise underneath. "Margaret!" Becky jumped out of the car and rushed to her. Margaret said nothing, just grabbed Becky's arm. Her fingers were ice-cold and trembling. "Where's April? Where is she?" Becky asked in an urgent voice. Margaret pointed inside the house and finally managed to squeeze out some words. "Upstairs. Caitlin's room." Then she gripped Becky's arm even tighter and continued in a trembling voice. "Please, just look quietly." Becky was confused. She had no idea what was happening, but from Margaret's behavior, she knew something serious was going on. "Where is Richard?" Becky looked around cautiously. "Out, but he'll be back soon, hurry." Following Margaret's urging, Becky entered the house. She passed through the silent, spacious living room and climbed the stairs. The second-floor hallway was dimly lit, with light leaking from under just one door. As she approached the door, she could hear small voices from inside. April and Caitlin's voices. Becky knocked lightly and opened the door slightly. "April." Entering the room, she saw the two girls gathered around a laptop on the bed. Both had serious expressions and were concentrating on something. April looked up and showed surprise at seeing her mother. "Mom. Why are you here?" "I got a call from Margaret." Becky began, then turned her attention to the laptop screen the girls were watching. At that moment, she gasped. The screen showed footage of what looked like a living room. Margaret was lying on the floor, and Richard was shouting something at her. There was no sound, but the violent nature of the scene was clear. The next clip showed Caitlin trembling against a wall, followed by a close-up of bruises on her arm. "What is this?" Becky was at a loss for words. April stood up and rushed to her mother. "Mom, we've been gathering evidence," she said in a determined voice. "Caitlin and her mom have been abused by Richard for a long time. No one believed them, so they needed proof." Becky looked at Caitlin. For the first time, she saw strength in the usually quiet girl's eyes. "I set up surveillance cameras," Caitlin said in a small voice. "Dad always, after we go to bed." Her voice broke. April put her arm around her friend's shoulder and continued, "Caitlin secretly borrowed a small camera from the drama teacher. The teacher thinks Caitlin is interested in filmmaking, but that wasn't true." Becky was speechless at the cruel evidence displayed on the screen. And suddenly everything made sense. Margaret's tense demeanor, her long-sleeved clothing, and Caitlin's withdrawn personality. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Becky finally managed to ask. "I did." Turning around, she saw Margaret entering the room. Her face was wet with tears, but there was a light of determination in her eyes. "In the beginning, I went to the police, to the hospital. But he's a respected doctor in town." "Mrs. Bradley, aren't you misunderstanding something? Didn't your child just fall?" "That's all they said. Richard was spreading rumors that I was mentally unstable." She took a deep breath and pushed back her hair with a trembling hand. "But tonight, he tried to hit Caitlin too. I can't take it anymore. Not the children." Suddenly, from downstairs, they heard the sound of a car engine. The blood drained from Margaret's face. Caitlin let out a small cry and gripped April's hand tightly. "Richard is back," Margaret said, almost breathlessly. The sound of the front door opening echoed from below, and everyone froze. "Margaret? Where are you?" A low, cold voice resonated throughout the house. "Caitlin, pack your things. April, you too. We're leaving right now," Becky quickly directed in a low voice. The two girls began to move swiftly. Caitlin packed essential items into a backpack, and April closed the laptop and put it in her bag. Margaret! Can't you hear me? Richard's voice echoed again, and the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs began to be heard. Margaret stood frozen in fear against the wall. Becky grabbed her shoulders and looked into her eyes. Margaret, this is your last chance. I'm getting you and Caitlin out of here. Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes, but she nodded slightly. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. Everyone, I know you're there. What are you doing? Richard's voice was superficially calm, but Becky felt a chill at the coldness lurking beneath it. The sound of the doorknob turning made everyone look in that direction. The door opened, and Richard Bradley appeared. His neat appearance and intellectual features were unchanged. But his eyes were cold and burning with anger. Well, Becky. What brings you here at this hour? He displayed a perfect smile, but his eyes weren't smiling. He seemed to quickly grasp the situation with a glance around the room. I came to pick up April, Becky said, trying to appear as calm as possible. Is that so? But the arrangement was for tomorrow afternoon, wasn't it? Richard raised his wrist as if to show his watch. It's only 10 o'clock at night. Plans changed, Becky said with a resolute attitude. Margaret called me. Richard's expression faltered for just a moment. He directed a sharp glance at Margaret, who was standing with a trembling hand against the wall for support. Margaret has been a bit mentally unstable lately, Richard said in the cool tone of a physician. I'm sorry if she's caused you unnecessary concern. He took one step into the room and closed the door behind him. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Actually, my wife is under psychiatric care. She sometimes has severe delusions, Richard smiled amicably. I don't know what she told you, but please don't believe it. Becky saw the fear-filled expressions on Margaret and Caitlin's faces. And she made up her mind. Richard, we're leaving. Margaret and Caitlin are coming with us. Richard's smile disappeared, replaced by a cold expression. That's impossible. It's not appropriate for outsiders to interfere in family matters. Domestic abuse is no longer a family matter, Becky said firmly. Richard's eyes emitted a dangerous light. Abuse? What evidence do you have? At this moment, April stepped forward and took the laptop from her bag. Here's the evidence. Richard showed signs of agitation for the first time. What kind of joke is this? It's not a joke, April said, opening the laptop with trembling hands and playing part of the earlier footage. The image clearly showed Margaret falling in the living room and Richard shouting at her. The blood drained from Richard's face. This is fabricated. It's been edited. No, it's real, Caitlin spoke up for the first time. Though still trembling, there was determination in her eyes. I set up the cameras myself. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the hallway. Shut up. Richard shouted and took a step toward Caitlin. Becky immediately stood between them. Don't touch her. Get out of my way, Richard's voice was low and dangerous. This is my house. My family. What right do you have? As a human being, as a nurse, as a mother. I have the right to protect those who are vulnerable from people like you, Becky didn't back down. Richard seemed to regain his composure for a moment. Think about this, Becky. I am a respected doctor in this town. Who do you think will believe your word? Margaret's mental state is unstable, and my daughter has been influenced by her. This is a matter of family therapy. It's over, Richard, Becky said quietly. We have all the evidence. The videos have already been uploaded to the cloud. You can't hide this anymore. Richard's expression hardened. He stared at Becky, and in the next moment, did something unexpected. He suddenly lunged at Margaret, grabbed her arm, and pulled her close. "Everyone get out," he shouted. "Or you don't know what might happen to her." Margaret screamed in terror. Caitlin also cried out, and April clung to her mother's arm. The situation had become extremely tense. At that moment, the door to the room opened again. "Let her go, Richard." A calm, resolute voice spoke. Thomas Martinson was standing there. His presence was unusually dignified. "Thomas!" Becky exclaimed in relief. "I called the police," Thomas said quietly. "They've already arrived." Richard was visibly shaken. "The police? By what authority?" "As a lawyer, and as a citizen, I have the authority to report when there is suspicion of abuse." Thomas took a step forward. "Let Margaret go." Richard hesitated for a moment, then released Margaret with a push. She stumbled, but Becky quickly steadied her. "This is a misunderstanding," Richard said desperately. "I never thought it would come to this. I'm a doctor. A respected doctor in this town." "That's over now," Thomas said calmly. Multiple footsteps were heard from downstairs, and 2 police officers entered the room. They seemed to quickly assess the situation. "Richard Bradley." One officer stepped forward. "We need you to come with us on suspicion of domestic violence." Richard showed defiance for a moment but soon slumped his shoulders. Before being escorted out of the room by the officers, he directed one last cold glance at Margaret and Caitlin. Those left in the room stood in silence for a while. Margaret trembled as she embraced Caitlin. April stood by her friend's side, and Becky and Thomas exchanged glances. "Is it really over?" Margaret asked in a small voice. "Yes, it's over." Becky placed her hand on her shoulder. "We'll protect you from now on." Thomas picked up the laptop. "This will be crucial evidence. We'll need to go through legal procedures, but he'll never be able to hurt you again." How should we? Margaret seemed at a loss. "Come to our house tonight," Becky said immediately. "From there, we'll start a new life one step at a time." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." Caitlin finally moved away from her mother's arms and looked at April. "If you hadn't been there, we would have always." "You're the one who found courage." April held her friend's hand. "I just helped a little." The police officers returned and began taking detailed statements. Becky watched as a female officer viewed the footage on the laptop and took notes with a serious expression. Thomas provided legal advice and started the process to ensure Margaret and Caitlin would receive the necessary protection. As the night wore on, the house gradually began to calm down. It was as if light was finally beginning to shine into a darkness filled with fear. "Let's go home," Becky finally said. "You can rest at our house." Margaret and Caitlin packed a few belongings, with April helping them. As the 4 descended the stairs, they took in the sight of the living room. Becky's heart ached to think of the many terrible events that had occurred here. Before leaving the house, Margaret turned back once to look at what had been her home. And she whispered softly, "Goodbye." Her voice carried more of a sense of liberation than fear. The 4 got into Becky's car and headed to the Martinson home. It was the beginning of a new life. On a Saturday in May, as spring sunlight brightly illuminated the town of Rochester, a barbecue party was being held in the Martinson family's backyard. Having survived the harshness of winter, the trees in the garden were wrapped in fresh green, and colorful flowers were in full bloom. "Caitlin, could you carry this salad?" When Becky called from the kitchen, Caitlin appeared with more confident steps than before. A smile adorned her face, with no trace of the fear that was once there. "Yes, Aunt Becky." Caitlin responded cheerfully as she took the salad bowl. In the 6 months since the incident, Caitlin and Margaret had started a new life in an apartment near the Martinson home. Margaret had found a job at the local library, and Caitlin continued at the same high school, joining the drama club and beginning to find her voice. "Everyone, gather round," Thomas called from the center of the garden. Next to him stood a fellow lawyer with whom he had established a support organization for domestic violence victims after winning the case against Richard Bradley. Since the incident, Thomas had become even more committed to legal support activities in the community. April and Caitlin sat side by side on a blanket on the lawn, discussing a school project. Their friendship had deepened further, bonded by a strong connection of mutual support. Watching Caitlin's recovery, April had begun to consider becoming a psychological counselor in the future. "Margaret, I'm so glad you could come." Becky gently placed her hand on her friend's shoulder. Margaret returned a gentle smile. She still suffered from nightmares sometimes, but was gradually healing through therapy and the support of those around her. "If it weren't for you, we would still be in that house," Margaret said quietly. "I can never thank you enough." Richard Bradley had received a 7-year prison sentence and had his medical license revoked. The reputation he had built in the community crumbled, and many people were shocked. This incident taught the whole town about the danger of judging people solely by their surface reputation. "Let's make a toast," Thomas raised his glass. "To new beginnings." As everyone raised their glasses, Becky reflected on the changes of the past 6 months. The night of terror had passed, and they were all moving forward in their own ways. Margaret and Caitlin had regained their freedom, April had learned the value of friendship and the importance of courage. And Becky herself had reconfirmed the importance of trusting her intuition and taking action. "Mom, look." April pointed to a corner of the garden. There, a young cherry tree planted during the winter was blooming for the first time. "A symbol of new life," Becky smiled. Watching the cherry blossoms dance in the wind under the sunlight, Becky whispered in her heart. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. Even if there are nights of terror, morning always comes. And we have the power to find light even in darkness." Their story was not an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter.